There is a scene in this movie that reminded me of my real life. When I was in my last year of college, I had an internship in an office building on Hollywood Boulevard. The only Latin Hispanic folks there were me and the janitors. When they'd clean the office or down in the cafe, I'd run into them and we'd chat a little. I don't remember if they spoke Spanish to me first or I did, but my Latin Hispanic street cred was on full display. I told them I was about to graduate college and I needed those internship credits. They seemed fairly proud of the fact that me, a semi-brown Latina, was getting her degree at college and was working in that building, not as a janitor or a cleaning lady, but as someone who represented the immigrant dream of moving up in the world. I was an unpaid intern whose degree ended up being useless, but still, I could still claim that the dream our immigrant communities have, our immigrant parents' dream. They work the hard back-breaking jobs so that we can make YouTube videos and have mental breakdowns over nothing. 'Tis but a dream. What was I talking about? Today, we are breaking down the 2002 romantic comedy classic, Maid in Manhattan. This movie had a lot of potential, but spoilers, it's very much a generic romantic comedy of errors that is kind of boring and I don't really like it. Yes, I'm a bitter old lady who hates romance. Well, straight heterosexual romance. The LGBTQIA alphabet mafia romance is lovely. Gay fanfic is magical, but this monotonous, generic, and bland love story is kind of lame. Maid in Manhattan is the perfect movie to remake. Instead of putting the romance at the forefront, better the race and class aspect of the story. That would be more interesting. That would be different. That would be something worth leaving the house to go see. A female gaze director like Patty Jenkins or Lorraine Scarafia should be the one to remake it. Ladies, we can do this and make it truly wonderful. I'm talking about a remake before the actual review to give you an idea of my feelings on this movie. We'll get into why I don't like rom-coms, how race and class curious this movie is, but doesn't really have the ovaries to say something about those topics or do something interesting with the plot. It's a shame too because all the folks involved here, from J-Lo all the way to the director, have done interesting work. It's a real shame that it's not a great movie. We'll talk about it. If in the last few videos I've been super nice and kind to the movies we've talked about, not to worry, grumpy, hateful Ruby is back. Sorry J-Lo, but this movie isn't good. Let's get into it. Maid in Manhattan is technically a John Hughes movie. I like to think it lives in the same universe as Home Alone and Uncle Buck. The story was developed by John Hughes and he was supposed to direct it. Back then, the movie was called The Chambermaid. Chambermaid sounds more like a weird German porno? Chambermaid, or its other title, Uptown Girl, not that one, was originally gonna star Hilary Swank. That version of the movie took place in the 1920s. When John Hughes was no longer part of the project, he was credited as Edmond Dantes. If you've ever read or watched the excellent movie The Count of Monte Cristo, Edmond Dantes is the protagonist of that story. Man, Henry Cavill has been really ridiculously good looking for a full 20 years. Amen, alleluia. Along with Hilary Swank, Julia Roberts, Sandra Bullock, and Minnie Driver decided not to be in the movie either. The story was modernized and Jennifer Lopez was cast as the lead. With J-Lo being the star, they added her Latina Bronx background to her character, Marissa. The movie does feel like they didn't think through the idea of changing the main character from being white to being Latina. That is one big thing that makes me go, and we'll get into it in a couple of sections. To me, the only distinct thing that feels 100% John Hughes in Maid in Manhattan is the commentary on class. Flicks like Pretty in Pink and The Breakfast Club are obviously about class, but that is a common theme across all John Hughes movies. Maid in Manhattan isn't any different. Well, it's quite different actually. The main difference is that this movie doesn't have anything to say about class or race or anything really. It's boring and generic, and the heterosexual breeding couple get together at the end. Yay! We'll talk about that in a couple of sections. With the movie cast, filming started in April of 2001 and finished in June of 2002. The movie was shot in the Roosevelt and Waldorf Astoria hotels in Manhattan. They also shot in Morris Heights in the West Bronx. Maid in Manhattan was released on December 13th, 2002 and was a huge hit. Now that we know how we got here, it's time to take a closer look at what we've got. Maid in Manhattan stars Jennifer Lopez, best known for being an icon, Ray Fiennes, best known for being Voldemort, plus he looks a lot like Liam Neeson. Speaking of Liam, his late wife Natasha Richardson is the White Lady. She is best known for being Lindsay Lohan's mom in The Parent Trap. Stanley Tucci, best known for helping Anne Hathaway in The Devil Wears Prada. Tyler Posey, best known for being shirtless on Teen Wolf, maybe also known as being Jane Villanueva's first boyfriend on Jane the Virgin. I also know him as an illegal kid Clark Kent had to save on Smallville. Guys remember that? Bet you don't. And finally, Bob Hoskins, best known for Who Framed Roger Rabbit and Super Mario Brothers. Amy Sedaris isn't a main character, but she's awesome and super funny. If you've never seen Strangers with Candy, check it out. It's wild. The movie was directed by Wayne Wang. His best known work is directing The Joy Luck Club. Maid in Manhattan tells the story of single mom Marisa Ventura. Marissa is raising a 10-year-old, I'm not sure, by herself in the Bronx. The kid, Ty, is a smart kid that is very anxious and thinks too much. Same, mijo, same. Marissa works for a fancy hotel in Manhattan as the maid. Hey, that's the name of the movie! New York Assemblyman Christopher Marshall makes that fancy hotel his campaign center. Stanley Tucci is here too. Fancy socialite Caroline Lane also moves into the hotel. Marissa's BFF Stephanie wants Marissa to apply for the manager job that just opened up at the hotel. Marissa doesn't want to for reasons. Ty has a deadbeat dad who keeps disappointing him and his mom. Marissa's mom is there, but not really supportive or anything. I don't know why she's there. You add nothing, ma'am. The mom role should have been played by Lupe Ontiveros to add to her oeuvre of terrible Latina villains. Add to that Lupe Ontiveros cinematic universe. Yeah. Marissa is friends with all the staff at the hotel and they all love her. Stephanie turns in the application for Marissa. They have a fake fight and Marissa does the training that comes along with taking the managerial position. The head butler, Lionel, trains her in all she has to know about the hotel and guests. Caroline becomes friendly with Marissa and treats Marissa as her own personal assistant. I hope she tips well. Ty's deadbeat dad dad can't look after Ty, so he goes to work with Marissa over the long holiday weekend. Ty wanders around the hotel and runs into Christopher walking his dog. Ty knows who Christopher is and even knows his voting record. You go, citizen. Ty asks if he can join Christopher and walk the dog. Christopher says it's cool as long as they ask Ty's mom. They go to the room she is cleaning, but in a case of mistaken identity, Christopher doesn't see her as the maid. He sees her in a fancy outfit. Marissa tries on some designer clothes. Caroline wants her to return, and there you go. A case of mistaken identity. Christopher thinks Marissa is Caroline. They all go for a walk in Central Park. Christopher becomes immediately obsessed with Marissa, and Marissa thinks he's cool. Christopher helps Ty get over his fear of public speaking, and that's nice. They part ways at the New York Zoo. Christopher tells the butler Lionel to ask pretty Caroline to join him for lunch at his hotel suite. The real Caroline shows up and it's awkward. More awkward is that Marissa has to shadow Lionel and learn more about butlering. Oh no. Christopher wants to know what happened to Mediterranean Caroline with her little boy Ty. Lionel realizes what is happening and saves Marissa a lot of embarrassment. Lionel ain't no snitch. Lionel does tell Marissa that if she wants to become a manager, she has to end it with Christopher. Marissa doesn't know what to do. I'm sorry, mija, but between money and a man, you always choose money. Always. Marissa consults her peeps and they all decide one of us will be manager. You gotta do it. That's a scene that reminded me of my internship days. We get a montage of Marissa being glammed up to go to this fancy charity event. Marissa tries to break it off with Christopher, but oops, they have sex. Like you do. Caroline is also at the event and semi-recognizes Marissa. The next day, Caroline sees Marissa leave Christopher's suite and puts it all together. Caroline Karens her way to management. Marissa is humiliated in front of everyone. Christopher finds out the truth. Marissa is fired. Lionel quits and gives a nice speech about being a servant. Christopher chases after her and Marissa drops some truth and science on Christopher. Not a lot, but some. He didn't notice her as a maid. They are from different worlds, etc. A couple of months pass. Marissa moves on and finds another job. Ty sees that Christopher is giving a speech at Marissa's new job. Ty plays matchmaker and gets them back together. We see an ending montage of Marissa and Christopher being a power couple. Marissa making it as a manager. Her friends are also becoming managers. The movie ends with Marissa helping Christopher's political campaign. The end. Analysis time. It's difficult to separate class from race in America. I'm going to try and keep them separate for no other reason than to keep everything as clear and streamlined as possible. Inevitably, there will be some overlap, but I will try my best to keep them separate. Class is defined by two main factors. One is money and the other is refinement. There are other factors, but for the purposes of this video, we are going to stick to those two as the main factors in this section. The other big factor is, you guessed it, race. We're going to talk about race in the next section. Some folks will claim that only people who have a certain amount of money are in a higher class. Other folks will say that people need money and refinement. The really bold people will say that no amount of money will make you refined or high class. Where do these rules and customs come from? Where these dumb things usually come from? Rich people in power. One question my sister always asks, and I will now start to ask too, is why do we, as a society, abide by these rules and customs? Enough folks agree with the rules and regulations when it comes to class and refinement, so here we are. There are folks, me for one, who will argue that class and refinement is something that can be taught. Scholars who look into class and refinement will point out that no one is born with a love of classical music, opera, caviar, filet mignon, de croix cakes, Italian wool, silk sheets, marble countertops, Dom Perignon, etc. All that stuff is enjoying the finer things in life. I also don't want to confuse refinement with status. Refinement is about enjoying and, more importantly, knowing about quality, history, artistry, all of that stuff. Status is about showing off the expensive things you can afford, debatably. Even if things look like garbage, the fact that it was expensive, that's all that matters. Status is super silly. Like in my neighborhood, for example, I live in the ghetto, and you'll see folks driving BMWs, Benzes, Porsches, but still living not just in the ghetto, but with their parents. If you're gonna live with your parents, have the decency to drive a Camry or an Accord and use that $100,000 to buy a house. Anyway, the other factor I want to talk about is that of being classy. By that, I mean how you carry yourself, speak, treat others, your poise, your grace, what you know, your education, etc. All of that stuff can also be taught. If the student makes an effort and really wants to be classier, they say that class can't be bought, and I agree, but class can be learned. There are many examples in the media, and Maid in Manhattan is one of them, though not in the traditional way. The whole premise of My Fair Lady is that Rex Harrison takes low-class bum off the street, Audrey Hepburn, and turns her into a high-class lady, proving that class can be taught. There are a lot of movies where we see this motif. Pretty Woman, Miss Congeniality, The Princess Diaries, The Devil Wears Prada, Aladdin, She Is All That, and of course, Maid in Manhattan. Anytime there is a montage of someone getting a makeover and learning about high-class things, that is the motif of class being a thing that is learned. Maid in Manhattan is a little different. Marissa knows about manners and other high-class things because she has to as part of her job, but because she is a servant, she nor anyone else can use that knowledge to their benefit. The servants are allowed to have this knowledge so they can be better servants to the fancy pants guests. The only real transgression Marissa makes is using her knowledge of upper class things to her benefit and romancing Voldemort. Let me give you an example of why class is a bigger deal in this movie and arguably in life than we think. In the movie, Marissa is found out in a very humiliating way that she has been pretending to be an upper class socialite. She is fired, other folks might lose their jobs, and the police might have to get involved. It's done in front of everyone, and Marissa has to leave literally out the back door in shame. Contrast that with the D plot of these upper class sisters who are fancy and French. They are literally stealing everything in sight, do heists apparently, and they aren't treated at all the same way Marissa is. They get a footnote saying they've been arrested, but I would bet dollars to donuts that they were shown more decency and respect than Marissa got. Why? Because these sisters are deemed upper class and Marissa is lower class. This reflects real life class politics. Look at how weed, a low class drug, is policed versus cocaine, an upper class drug. Then come back and tell me class isn't a thing. Class is also a factor in how Marissa and Voldemort interact. When Marissa is a maid, she can't even correct the real Caroline that her name is Marissa and not Maria. The poop storm that would have happened if Marissa corrected Caroline? Based on the Karen moment Caroline has at the end, Marissa has to stay silent and do her job no matter how she is treated by the rich folks, including Voldemort. When they first meet, she is scrubbing a toilet and runs out as if she did something wrong, instead of treating that situation like the whoops boo-boo that it is. When Marissa is in Caroline mode, she is free to speak her mind and she doesn't have to worry about any repercussions. Twice, Voldemort is impressed that faux Caroline tells it like it is. Marissa would not be allowed to, but Caroline absolutely can. If Marissa said anything to Voldemort as the maid about his politics, he'd give a generic politician answer and write her off as an angry Latina. However, faux Caroline Marissa is free to say whatever she thinks, and because they are in the same class, that makes Voldemort impressed by her outspokenness. Faux Caroline is not only allowed to speak her mind freely, her opinions are taken seriously. Since class and money are often confused for one another, that is why faux Caroline is taken seriously. Rich folks are considered geniuses for some reason. You thought I'd mention this guy. This guy is the worst, but this guy is terrible as well. The movie cleverly shows how no manners or etiquette these rich ladies are, and how upper class actually Marissa is. Once again, class cannot be bought, but it can be learned. The other thing that helps Marissa fool everyone is that she looks racially ambiguous. Time to move on to the next section. Like I said earlier, this movie is race curious. If this were a typical rom-com, the Maid character would be a white lady down on her luck, or she needs a second job to pay for her mother's cancer treatment or something like that. The white lady being a maid would have to be explained. How could this white lady be a maid? The laws of physics are crumbling before my eyes. A Latina, though, being a maid, no explanation needed. That is the natural order of things. A Latina having money or prestige, that would need an explanation. Well, a certain kind of Latina. A lighter skinned, ethnically ambiguous, well-spoken, educated, no accented, attractive Latina wouldn't have to explain much. Darker, ghetto, GED certified, heavier, barrio accented Latina would have to explain herself every 5 minutes. Now, J-Lo is a kind of Latina that can pull off being upper class and also can keep it real. It's fascinating to me how Voldemort thinks faux Caroline is Mediterranean. This goes along with the class thing. When you're lower class and a person of color, you're always referred to as foreign. If you present yourself as upper class and you're a person of color, you are referred to as exotic. Those of us who have dated white boys, you know what I'm talking about. For Voldemort to think faux Caroline is Mediterranean says so much. 1. Did he think Western European because only they have a nice summer color? Your summer glow is lovely, J-Lo. 2. Can only European folks have money and class? 3. He was shocked to learn that faux Caroline is Latina. Shocked. Being Latino automatically means lower class and poor, doesn't it? The look on his face is like, what do you mean Latina? Why aren't you cleaning the toilet? She was cleaning it earlier, sir. I think most rich upper class white folks never interact with people of color unless they are the help. And the help is never meant to be seen or heard, like the movie points out here. They are never to be noticed. And we'll get into that in a minute. Voldemort thinking faux Caroline is Mediterranean gave me flashbacks to my dating years. I picture a director's cut where Voldemort asks faux Caroline, "Girl, where are you from? You look so exotic." That is every white boy's favorite compliment. You look exotic. Oh. God. Yikes, bro. Like I said earlier, J-Lo can play both the upper class lady and keep it real. Get you a girl who can do both. She is allowed to occupy and stand out in upper class rich white people society because she reads as exotic and not foreign or ghetto. J-Lo is Clark Kent Supermaning it in a very impressive way here. Fake it till you make it, mija. If the casting was of a different Latina or other woman women of color, this would have been an entirely different movie. All actors of color can pull off this role. If the audience buys it, is another thing. I was chatting about this with my sister, and I mentioned how if, let's say, a different Latina from New York, Rosie Perez, was cast instead of J-Lo, would it be the same movie? Not to knock Rosie as an actor because she is an excellent actor, but because if you change J-Lo for a boring white lady, it would be the same movie. Kind of more or less the same movie. Why? Imagine that charity formal scene with Rosie. She walks around the party and you know some old white person is gonna come and ask her for an hors d'oeuvre or a drink, thinking she is the help and not a guest at this event. Heck, when I'm out in Malibu with my white-looking mom, the white folks out there think I am her servant. That is how a lot of rich upper-class white people are. It's not entirely their fault. It's the white supremacy that has been ingrained in us since forever. So adding the Latina background to Marissa's character and not really addressing it beyond, well, she lives in the Bronx, is... I wouldn't say it's bad, it's just sloppy storytelling. I know some folks will claim that ethnicity isn't a person's whole identity, but in the context of this movie, it is a thing that has to be addressed. And it's never addressed. Aside from that one, you're Spanish? Why though? To go along with addressing the race part, code switching should have been a part of this movie. Or point out how all the folks in higher managerial positions in the hotel are all white and fancy, and all the lower jobs are for people of color, and how Marissa would never be considered for a management position because she is Latina. The movie wants you to think it's because she hasn't applied for the job, but look at who gets those jobs and who doesn't. The movie is very confused if it's colorblind or if it wants to address color but doesn't know how to. I know. It's a rom-com and people don't come for logic or politics. They want these attractive people to fall in love and live happily ever after. Even though, let's be real, these two will not live happily ever after. We all know it ain't happening. Last thing I'll mention in this section is the speech Bob Hoskins gives as he leaves the hotel. It's a nice speech, but I would have much rather preferred if a person of color delivered it. The speech would have been way more impactful, I think. My sister suggested that role should have gone to Joseph Marcel, aka Jeffrey from The Fresh Prince. My suggestion would be Luis Guzman. Both gentlemen are fabulous actors with a lot of gravitas, and both would have made that speech and performance have more weight to it. A fancy white guy white-splaining class doesn't quite do it for me. A person of color spitting the truth does. No, not at all. They are still really bad, but this one was enjoyable enough. It had more potential than actual substance, so that's disappointing, but it's a little better than most. Why doesn't that relationship work out? An upper class guy marrying a lower class woman is nothing taboo. Rich dudes marry the nanny or the maid all the time. Ew, the help? I'd argue it's more taboo for an upper class woman to marry a lower class man. You don't see that ever, really. It's so rare and taboo, it's probably its own genre of porn. That's not why though. Christopher is a politician. Political attacks will be made against him because his wife is a working class Latina. Also, he's a Republican. That's a whole other load of problems no one is prepared for in this movie. Also, her success will always be tied to his. There would be a lot of, you wouldn't be a manager if it wasn't for your rich, successful husband. And maybe Christopher would be one of those Republicans who want to close the border, but reassures Marissa that she is not that kind of Latina, not one of the bad ones. You know that's how that would go down. My favorite thing, though, about this genre of rom-com is how it reinforced the idea of faking it till you make it. The real goal isn't love necessarily, it's moving up the class ladder in the world. Like glamour, like magic, class is something you can learn, practice, and convince people is real. Nothing is out of reach. It's all a lesson and a lot of practice away. Achieve those dreams, familia. Have you guys seen Maid in Manhattan? What do you guys think about it and about my takeaways? I would love to know any and all of your thoughts. What's your favorite rom-com, if there is such a thing? Thank you so much for watching, and as always, salud, mi familia.